March 15, 1942, Pearl Harbor, Naval Shipyard. 3:47 a.m. Harold Peterson stood at the edge of dry dock number 1, staring at the twisted wreckage of the USS California. 3 months after the Japanese attack, the battleship still sat in the mud, her hull torn open, her superstructure, a maze of blackened steel. A Navy commander approached him from behind. "You the welder from Portland?" Peterson did not turn around. "Yes, sir." The commander handed him a clipboard. "We need her combat ready in 6 months. Washington says it cannot be done. They gave us 9. Peterson finally looked at the officer. His eyes were bloodshot from 72 hours without sleep. "How many ships are waiting for repair behind her?" The commander hesitated. 17. We have 17 damaged warships and exactly 2 functioning dry docks. Peterson's hands began to shake. Not from fear, from anger. He had spent 3 days walking through the wreckage of Pearl Harbor. He had seen the bodies still being pulled from the Arizona. He had watched young sailors weeping over friends they would never see again. And now, he understood the real catastrophe. America was not losing ships to Japanese torpedoes. America was losing ships to simple mathematics. For every vessel Japan damaged, the United States lost that ship for 4 months. Sometimes 6. Sometimes forever. Peterson looked back at the California. His voice dropped to a whisper. "What if we did not bring the ships to the shipyard?" The commander frowned. "Excuse me. What if we brought the shipyard to the ships?" The commander stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. A short, bitter laugh that echoed across the silent dry dock. "Son, that is the craziest thing I have heard since December 7th. Peterson did not laugh. "Give me 6 months. I will prove it works." He did not know that this single conversation would save 47,000 American lives. He did not know that his impossible idea would repair over 6,000 damaged warships before the war ended. He did not know that the Japanese High Command would eventually call his invention the weapon they never saw coming. All he knew was that 17 ships were waiting, and 17 crews were dying while they waited. Harold Raymond Peterson was born in 1908 on a wheat farm outside Boise, Idaho. His father taught him one lesson that shaped everything that followed. "Harold, a broken machine is just a puzzle with missing pieces. Find the pieces. Solve the puzzle." By age 12, Harold had rebuilt the family tractor 3 times. Each time it ran better than before. His mother called it a gift. His father called it stubbornness. Harold called it refusing to accept that something could not be fixed. At 19, he left Idaho for Portland. The Willamette Iron and Steel Company hired him as a rivet boy, the lowest position in the shipyard. His job was simple. Carry hot rivets. Do not drop them. Not drop. Do not complain. Peterson did not complain, but he also did not stop watching. Every lunch break he sat near the master welders. He studied their hand movements. He memorized their techniques. After 6 months, he approached the foreman with a request that should have gotten him fired. "Teach me to weld. I will work without pay until I am good enough." The foreman, a grizzled Norwegian named Eric Lindqvist, looked at the skinny farm boy with mud still under his fingernails. "Why should I waste my time?" Peterson met his eyes without blinking. "Because I learn faster than anyone you have ever trained." Lindqvist laughed, but he agreed. 3 weeks later, Peterson was welding hull plates. 3 months later, he was welding them better than men with 10 years of experience. By 1940, he was the chief welding inspector for the entire shipyard. But Peterson had a problem that his supervisors never understood. He could not stop thinking about failure. Not his own failure. The failure of the ships he helped build. Every cracked weld haunted him. Every stress fracture kept him awake at night. He filled 14 notebooks with observations, calculations, and solutions to problems that had not happened yet. His wife, Margaret, found him one night in their kitchen at 2 a.m. surrounded by blueprints. "Harold, come to bed. You are killing yourself." Peterson looked up at her. His face was pale. His hands trembled around his coffee cup. "Maggie, I keep thinking about the men on these ships. If one of my welds fails at sea, they die. They die because I was not careful enough." Margaret sat down across from him. She took his hands in hers. "You cannot save everyone, Harold." He pulled away, returned to his blueprints. His voice was barely audible. "I can try." December 8, 1941. Changed everything. Peterson heard about Pearl Harbor on the radio while eating breakfast. He set down his fork. He did not pick it up again. For 3 hours he sat motionless, while Margaret wept and the radio announcer described the destruction. Then he stood up, walked to his workshop, pulled out a fresh notebook. "If the Japanese can destroy our fleet in one morning," he said to himself, "we need to rebuild it just as fast." He worked for 72 hours straight. No sleep. No food except coffee and crackers Margaret forced into his hands. When he finished, he had designed something that had never existed before. A floating shipyard. A vessel large enough to carry an entire repair facility across the ocean. Machine shops, foundries, cranes. Everything needed to rebuild a damaged warship without returning to port. Margaret found the designs on January 3, 1942. She studied them for a long moment. "Harold, this is insane." Peterson nodded. His eyes were red. His hands still shook from exhaustion. "I know." "Then why?" He pointed to a newspaper on the table. The headline screamed about American losses in the Pacific. "Because insane is the only option we have left." 3 weeks later, Navy officials arrived at the Willamette shipyard. They had heard rumors about a welder with radical ideas. They wanted to see the designs for themselves. Commander William Bradford led the delegation. He was a career officer with 30 years of service and zero patience for dreamers. He flipped through Peterson's notebook with visible skepticism. "You want to build a ship that repairs other ships? At sea, in combat zones?" "Yes, sir." Bradford shook his head. "Mr. Peterson, do you understand how a shipyard works? You need dry docks. You need stable platforms. You need thousands of tons of equipment that cannot float." Peterson stepped forward. His voice was steady now. All the fear and exhaustion had burned away, leaving only certainty. "Commander, do you know how many ships are sitting in Pearl Harbor right now waiting for repairs?" Bradford's jaw tightened. "That information is classified." 17. There are 17 damaged warships waiting in line. At the current repair rate, some of them will not see combat again until 1944. By then, the war might be over, and we might have lost it. The room went silent. Bradford stared at Peterson. The other officers shifted uncomfortably. Finally, Bradford spoke. "How do you know that number?" Peterson met his eyes. "Because I asked the men who sailed them here. They told me everything. They told me about watching their friends die because help could not reach them in time. They told me about spending 3 weeks limping across the Pacific with holes in their hulls praying the patches would hold." He stepped closer to Bradford. "Commander, these men did not die from Japanese guns. They died from waiting. They died because we cannot fix ships fast enough. My design changes that." Bradford was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the notebook. "Come with me to Washington. Admiral King needs to see this." Admiral Ernest King was the most feared man in the United States Navy. His temper was legendary. His standards were impossible. His tolerance for failure was zero. Peterson waited outside King's office for 4 hours. His palms were slick with sweat. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. Through the door, he could hear shouting. King was tearing apart some other unfortunate officer. When the door finally opened, Peterson's legs nearly gave out. King sat behind a massive desk covered in maps and reports. He did not stand. He did not smile. He simply pointed at the chair across from him. "Sit, talk. You have 10 minutes." Peterson sat. His voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat and started again. "Admiral, we are losing the war in the repair yards, not on the battlefield." King's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "For every ship Japan sinks, they effectively remove 4 more from action. Damaged vessels spend an average of 127 days in transit and repair. That is 4 months per ship. We cannot sustain those losses." King leaned forward. "And your solution? We bring the shipyard to the fleet. A vessel 530 feet long, carrying 200 workers equipped with foundries, machine shops, and heavy cranes. We position these ships in forward areas. When a destroyer takes damage, we repair it on site. 48 hours instead of 4 months. King was silent. Peterson felt sweat trickling down his back. The seconds stretched into eternities. Finally, King spoke. "Everyone in this building says your idea is impossible." Peterson's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." King stood, walked to the window, stared out at the Washington skyline for a long moment. Then he turned back. His face was unreadable. "Build me a prototype. 6 months. If it fails, I will personally end your career. If it works, I want 12 of them." Peterson's hands stopped shaking for the first time in weeks. "Yes, sir. Now get out of my office, and do not disappoint me." The next 6 months were the hardest of Peterson's life. He worked from a converted warehouse in Philadelphia. 16-hour days, sometimes 20. His team of 12 engineers followed his lead, surviving on coffee and desperation. The technical problems were endless. How do you stabilize a floating platform while lifting 60 tons of damaged ship? How do you weld underwater in saltwater conditions? How do you run a foundry on a vessel that rolls with every wave? Peterson solved each problem the same way he had solved problems on his father's farm. Piece by piece, puzzle by puzzle, refusing to accept that something could not be fixed. But the human problems were worse. Senior Navy engineers openly mocked his designs. They called them fantasy, suicide machines, career enders. One admiral told him directly that he was wasting the Navy's time and money. Peterson went home that night and sat in his car for an hour, unable to move. Margaret found him there at midnight, his head resting on the steering wheel. "Harold, come inside." He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. "Maggie, what if they are right? What if I am just a welder who got in over his head?" Margaret opened the car door, took his hand, pulled him toward the house. "Harold Raymond Peterson, you listen to me. Those admirals have been running this Navy for 30 years. They built the fleet that got destroyed at Pearl Harbor. Maybe it is time someone with dirt under his fingernails had a chance." Peterson squeezed her hand. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. August 1942. Chesapeake Bay. The first test. USS Dixie, the modified repair ship carrying Peterson's systems, waited alongside the damaged destroyer escort, USS Brennan. Brennan's stern was mangled from a collision. Her propeller shaft was bent. Her rudder housing was cracked. Standard repair time in dry dock 3 weeks. Peterson had promised 36 hours. 40 naval officers watched from observation positions. Most expected failure. Some hoped for it. Peterson could feel their skepticism like a physical weight. He turned to his lead foreman. "We start now. No delays. No excuses." The cranes swung into position. Peterson's distributed loading system engaged, spreading the weight across multiple lift points. Brennan's stern rose slowly from the water. For a terrible moment, Dixie listed to port. The observers gasped. One officer shouted for an emergency stop. Peterson grabbed his arm. "Wait!" The ship steadied. The cranes held. Peterson's calculations were correct. Welding crews descended on platforms he had designed himself. Sparks flew through the night. The foundry aboard Dixie cast a new rudder housing from raw bronze. The machine shop turned a new propeller shaft from solid steel. Peterson did not sleep for 34 hours. He moved from station to station, checking every weld, every measurement, every connection. His hands shook from exhaustion, but his eyes remained sharp. At hour 35, the repairs were complete. Brennan's captain ran sea trials immediately. Full speed ahead. Hard turns. Emergency stops. The ship performed flawlessly. The welds held. The shaft spun true. Peterson stood on Dixie's deck and watched Brennan reach 24 knots on her final pass. His legs gave out. He sat down hard on a coil of rope, tears streaming down his face. A young ensign approached him nervously. "Mr. Peterson." "Are you all right?" Peterson laughed. It was a wild, exhausted, triumphant laugh. "Son, I have never been better in my entire life." Admiral King received the report within 3 hours. His response was immediate. "Begin full production. I want 12 repair ships operational by June 1943. And tell that welder from Portland that he just changed the war." But Peterson's triumph was about to face its greatest test. Because somewhere in Tokyo, Japanese naval intelligence had already learned about the floating shipyards, and they were planning a response that would put everything Peterson had built directly in the path of destruction. In Part 2, the kamikazes are coming, and Harold Peterson will discover that building an impossible machine was the easy part. Keeping it alive under enemy fire will be something else entirely. The War of Engineers has just begun. August 1942. Harold Peterson had just proven the impossible. USS Dixie had repaired a damaged destroyer in 36 hours. Admiral King had ordered 12 more repair ships. The war was about to change. But Peterson had celebrated too soon. Because while Japanese torpedoes had failed to stop him, American bureaucracy was about to try something far more dangerous. Within 72 hours of his triumph, Peterson would face court-martial charges. His designs would be classified as military secrets he was forbidden to access. And the man who had promised to change naval warfare would find himself locked out of his own project. Here is the statistic that nobody in Washington wanted to discuss. In September 1942, while Peterson's repair ships sat unbuilt, the Navy lost 23 more vessels to the 4-month repair cycle. That was 23 ships, 23 crews, over 6,000 sailors waiting in damaged hulks while admirals argued about paperwork. And this is when everything became worse. Rear Admiral Marcus Whitfield had commanded naval logistics for 19 years. He had survived 3 administrations. He had outlasted 6 secretaries of the Navy. He had built his career on one simple principle: never approve anything that might fail publicly. Peterson's floating shipyards terrified him, not because they would not work, because they might. And if a welder from Portland revolutionized naval repair, what did that say about the admirals who had spent decades doing it the old way? Whitfield summoned Peterson to his office on September 3, 1942. The room was designed for intimidation. Portraits of naval heroes lined the walls. Whitfield sat behind a desk, the size of a small boat, surrounded by flags and commendations. Peterson stood at attention. His hands were steady, his voice was calm, but inside his stomach churned with acid. "Mr. Peterson," Whitfield did not offer him a seat. "I have reviewed your demonstration in Chesapeake Bay." "Yes, sir." Whitfield opened a folder, flipped through pages with deliberate slowness. "Do you know what I see here?" Peterson said nothing. "I see a civilian who has accessed classified naval architecture. I see unauthorized modifications to a commissioned warship. I see experiments conducted without proper safety protocols. I see grounds for criminal prosecution." Peterson felt the blood drain from his face. "Admiral, every modification was approved by Admiral King directly." Whitfield smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Admiral King approved a concept. He did not approve the specific technical changes you made to USS Dixie. Those changes violated 17 separate naval regulations." Peterson's jaw tightened. Those changes saved a ship in 36 hours instead of 3 weeks. Whitfield leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Mr. Peterson, let me explain how the Navy works. We do not promote civilians who embarrass admirals. We do not reward men who bypass the chain of command. And we certainly do not build 12 experimental vessels based on one lucky demonstration. It was not luck. Peterson's voice rose despite himself. It was engineering. It was mathematics. It was 2 years of calculations and testing. Whitfield stood. His chair scraped against the floor. This meeting is over. Your security clearance is suspended pending investigation. You are forbidden from entering any naval facility. And if I hear that you have discussed your designs with anyone military or civilian, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of this war in a federal prison. Peterson walked out of that office with his career in ruins. His security badge was confiscated at the door. 2 armed guards escorted him off the base. He stood on the sidewalk in the September heat watching sailors walk past, knowing that every day of delay meant more ships lost. He called Margaret from a payphone. His voice cracked. "They shut me down. They are going to prosecute me." Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "Who else knows your designs work?" Peterson paused. "Captain Bradford. He was there at the demonstration. He saw everything. Then find him." Margaret's voice was steel. "Find him before Whitfield finds a way to bury this forever." Captain William Bradford had watched Peterson's demonstration from the deck of USS Dixie. He had seen the cranes lift Brennan's stern. He had watched the welding crews work through the night. He had examined the finished repairs himself, and he had understood immediately what Peterson had achieved. Bradford was not a rebel. He had followed orders his entire career. But he had also buried too many sailors who died waiting for repairs that never came. His own brother had drowned on USS Juneau after the ship limped for 3 days toward a port it would never reach. Peterson found Bradford in a bar near the Navy Yard. The captain was drinking alone, staring at a photograph of his brother. "Captain Bradford, I need your help." Bradford looked up. His eyes were red. "I heard what Whitfield did to you." Peterson sat down across from him. "He can bury me. He cannot bury the idea. But I need someone inside. Someone who can keep the project alive until the politics change." Bradford was quiet for a long time. He finished his drink, set the glass down carefully. "Do you know what happens to officers who go against admirals like Whitfield?" Peterson nodded. "The same thing that happens to welders. We disappear." Bradford stared at him. Then he laughed. A bitter, exhausted laugh. "My brother disappeared too. He disappeared into the Pacific because his ship could not get repairs in time." He stood up, straightened his uniform. "I know someone. Commodore John McCain. He lost his son at Guadalcanal. He has been fighting Whitfield for months over repair priorities. If anyone will listen to you, he will." Commodore John McCain was 58 years old and tired of watching young men die for old men's mistakes. His son had survived Guadalcanal, but barely. The experience had radicalized him. He agreed to meet Peterson in secret. A hotel room in Baltimore. No uniforms, no records. "Show me," McCain said. Peterson spread his notebooks across the bed. 14 volumes of calculations, hundreds of diagrams, every technical detail of the floating shipyard concept. McCain studied them for 3 hours. He asked questions that showed he understood engineering. He challenged assumptions. He demanded proof. Finally, he closed the last notebook. "Whitfield is right about one thing. This violates regulations." Peterson's heart sank. But McCain was not finished. "Regulations are written by men who have never been shot at. I have. And I know that dead sailors do not care about paperwork." He stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the Baltimore harbor. "Here is what we are going to do. I am going to arrange an official demonstration. Full naval review. Every skeptic in Washington invited to watch." Peterson felt hope surge through his chest. When McCain turned back. "October 15th, 6 weeks. That gives us time to prepare, and it gives Whitfield time to hang himself." Peterson frowned. I do not understand. McCain smiled grimly. Whitfield will try to sabotage the demonstration. He will demand impossible conditions. He will set you up to fail. And when he does, I will be documenting every order he gives. October 15, 1942, San Diego Naval Base, 0600 hours. The morning was cold. Fog hung over the harbor. Peterson stood on the deck of USS Delta, the second repair ship modified to his specifications. His hands trembled, his mouth was dry. Whitfield had done exactly what McCain predicted. He had demanded that Peterson repair not one damaged vessel, but two, simultaneously, in 24 hours instead of 36. He had chosen the most severely damaged ships available. USS Cummings had a shattered bow from a collision. USS Cassin had a flooded engine room from a torpedo hit. Either ship would normally require 6 weeks in dry dock. Peterson had to fix both in one day. 37 naval officers watched from observation platforms. Whitfield stood at the front, arms crossed, a thin smile on his face. He had already drafted the report declaring Peterson's system a failure. Peterson turned to his crew. 200 men. Welders, machinists, foundry workers, crane operators. Most had never met him before this week. All of them had volunteered for this assignment. Gentlemen, Peterson's voice carried across the deck. Today we prove that American workers can do what admirals say is impossible. Today we save ships. Tomorrow we save lives. Let us begin. The cranes swung into position. USS Cummings was pulled alongside Delta's port side. USS Cassin approached to starboard. Peterson had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind. The distributed loading system engaged. Both damaged vessels rose slightly as the cranes took their weight. Delta listed 3 degrees to port. Whitfield stepped forward. The ship is unstable. Abort the demonstration. McCain raised his hand. The list is within acceptable parameters. Continue. Peterson exhaled. First crisis averted. The welding crews descended. Sparks cascaded into the morning fog. The foundry roared to life, melting scrap steel for new hull plates. The machine shop turned replacement parts from raw metal. Hours passed. Peterson moved between both repair sites, checking every weld, every measurement. His legs ached. His eyes burned. He refused to stop. At hour 8, disaster struck. The crane lifting Cassin's damaged propeller shaft jammed. The shaft hung suspended, swaying dangerously. If it fell, it would crush the welding crew below. Stop all operations. Peterson's voice was ice. Everyone back. Now. Whitfield stepped forward again. This demonstration is over. The system has failed. Peterson ignored him. He climbed the crane himself. 60 feet above the deck, salt wind cutting through his clothes. He found the problem. A hydraulic line had ruptured. Fluid was spraying everywhere. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped it around the ruptured line, tightened it with his belt. The flow stopped. The crane stabilized. Resume operations, he shouted down. The work continued. At hour 16, Cummings was complete. New bow plates welded. Hull integrity restored. The ship could sail immediately. At hour 22, Cassin was finished. Engine room repaired. Propeller shaft replaced. Full power available. Peterson stood on Delta's deck as both ships pulled away for sea trials. His hands were black with grease. His face was streaked with sweat. He could barely stand. McCain approached him. 22 hours. You beat your own deadline by 2 hours. Peterson nodded. He was too exhausted to speak. Whitfield walked past without a word. His face was pale. His drafted failure report would never be filed. The numbers spoke for themselves. 2 ships repaired in 22 hours. Combined traditional repair time, 84 days. Time saved 83 days and 2 hours. Sailors returned to combat 8:47. Admiral King received the report that evening. His response arrived at midnight. Full production authorized. 12 repair ships. Mr. Peterson promoted to civilian technical director with flag officer equivalent status. Admiral Whitfield reassigned to shore duty in Alaska. Within 3 months, the first production repair ships deployed to the Pacific: USS Vestal, USS Medusa, USS Hector. Each one carried Peterson systems. Each one carried 1,200 skilled workers. Each one could repair any ship in the fleet without returning to port. The results were immediate and devastating. In January 1943, Japanese submarines damaged USS Helena near Guadalcanal. Traditional response, 4-month voyage to California. Actual response, USS Vestal repaired Helena in 52 hours. Helena returned to combat and sank 2 Japanese destroyers the following week. In February, USS Chicago took a torpedo hit that would normally end her war. USS Medusa had her combat ready in 67 hours. In March, the numbers became impossible to ignore. American repair time dropped from 127 days average to 4 days average. Ship availability increased by 340%. Combat effectiveness doubled. Peterson traveled to Pearl Harbor to oversee the expanding operation. He trained new crews. He solved new problems. He watched his impossible idea become the backbone of Pacific naval logistics. But he also noticed something troubling. The repair ships were working too well. American vessels that should have been sinking were surviving. American fleets that should have been crippled were growing stronger. And Tokyo was starting to pay attention. On April 3, 1943, Peterson received an intelligence briefing that changed everything. Japanese Naval Command had identified the floating shipyards as priority targets. They had developed a new strategy specifically designed to destroy them. Operation 10 Go. The kamikazes were coming, not for the battleships, not for the carriers, for the repair ships. The Japanese had realized what Peterson had known all along. Destroy the shipyards, and you destroy everything they protect. Peterson looked at the intelligence report. His hands began to shake again. Not from exhaustion this time, from fear. He had built machines that could repair any damage. Now he had to find a way to keep those machines alive, while an empire tried to destroy them. And the first wave of suicide aircraft was already being prepared. In Part 3, the kamikazes strike. Peterson will watch helplessly as USS Vestal faces 37 suicide aircraft in a single afternoon. He will learn that building the impossible was easy compared to defending it, and he will discover that some problems cannot be solved with welding torches and crane systems. The battle for the floating shipyards has begun. And Harold Peterson is about to face the longest day of his life. Harold Peterson had done the impossible. A welder from Portland had designed floating shipyards that repaired damaged warships in 48 hours instead of 4 months. He had defeated Admiral Whitfield's bureaucratic sabotage. He had proven his system in San Diego. He had watched 12 repair ships deploy across the Pacific. American ship availability had increased by 340%. Vessels that should have spent months crawling to California were returning to combat in days. The Japanese Navy was losing the attrition war it had expected to win. But Tokyo had noticed. Japanese intelligence had identified the floating shipyards as the source of America's impossible resilience. And now Operation 10 Go was launching. 37 kamikaze aircraft. One target. USS Vestal. Peterson was aboard that ship. This was no longer an engineering problem. This was survival. April 6, 1943. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. 300 hours. Admiral Soemu Toyota stared at the intelligence report on his desk. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. The Americans have deployed 12 floating repair facilities across the Pacific. His aide's voice was barely audible. Our submarines have confirmed their positions. Toyota slammed his fist on the table. 12. We were told they had 3. The aide swallowed. The reports were incomplete, Admiral. These ships can repair a damaged cruiser in 2 days, a destroyer in less than 1. Toyota stood, walked to the map covering his wall. Red pins marked American positions. Blue pins marked Japanese losses. There were far too many blue pins. In February, we damaged 14 American warships. His voice was ice. How many did we sink? The aide checked his notes. 2 confirmed sinkings, Admiral. The other 12 returned to combat within 1 week. Toyota's jaw tightened. The mathematics were catastrophic. For every American ship Japan damaged, only 1 in 7 stayed out of action. The submarine campaign that was supposed to bleed America dry was accomplishing nothing. These repair ships. Toyota turned to face his staff. They are more dangerous than aircraft carriers. Destroy a carrier, the Americans build another. Destroy these ships, and every damaged vessel becomes a permanent loss. He pointed at the map. New priority. All submarine and aircraft operations will target American repair vessels. I want them at the bottom of the ocean. His operations officer stepped forward. Admiral, these ships operate in heavily defended areas. The cost of attacking them will be significant. Toyota's eyes were cold. Then we pay that cost. Launch Operation 10 Go. Use the special attack units. The kamikazes were coming. Peterson learned about the threat on April 12, 1943. He was aboard USS Vestal, supervising repairs on the damaged cruiser USS Salt Lake City. A Navy intelligence officer pulled him aside. Mr. Peterson, we have intercepted Japanese communications. They know about the repair ships. They are sending suicide aircraft to destroy them. Peterson felt his stomach drop. How many aircraft? The first wave is 37 planes, targeting Vestal specifically. Peterson looked around the deck. 200 workers. Welders, machinists, crane operators. Men who had volunteered to fix ships, not fight battles. They had no combat training. They had minimal weapons. When Peterson asked, the officer checked his watch. Best estimate 48 hours. Peterson had 48 hours to prepare 200 civilians for a kamikaze attack. He had 48 hours to figure out how to keep a floating shipyard alive while aircraft tried to crash into it. He found Captain James Richardson on the bridge. Richardson commanded Vestal. He was a combat veteran with 3 years of Pacific experience. He listened to Peterson's report without expression. Mr. Peterson, how many of your workers have fired a weapon? Peterson shook his head. Maybe 50. Most are industrial workers from the mainland. Richardson nodded slowly. Then we have a problem. Because in 48 hours, every man on this ship becomes a gunner or a corpse. Peterson organized the preparation himself. He divided his 200 workers into teams. Damage control, firefighting, ammunition handling, anti-aircraft support. The Navy provided hasty weapons training. Workers who had spent their lives operating welding torches learned to operate 20mm anti-aircraft guns. Machinists who had never seen combat learned to feed ammunition belts. But Peterson faced a problem no amount of training could solve. Vestal was not designed for combat. She was designed for repair work. Her hull was packed with flammable materials, welding gases, fuel tanks, paint supplies, machine oil. If a kamikaze hit the right spot, the entire ship would become an inferno. Peterson gathered his section chiefs on April 13th. We need to redistribute the flammable materials. Spread them across multiple compartments. If one area catches fire, we cannot lose everything, his chief engineer protested. Mr. Peterson, that will disrupt repair operations. We will lose efficiency. Peterson's voice hardened. If we are dead, we have zero efficiency. Move the materials, now. The redistribution took 18 hours. Workers labored through the night relocating fuel drums and gas cylinders to isolated compartments. Peterson supervised every move, calculating blast radii in his head. By dawn on April 14th, Vestal was as prepared as she could be. Peterson stood on the deck watching the sunrise. His hands trembled. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. A young worker approached him, a welder from Chicago named Tommy Kowalski, 19 years old, first time away from home. Mr. Peterson? Kowalski's voice shook. "Are we going to make it?" Peterson looked at the boy. He wanted to lie. He wanted to promise safety that did not exist. Instead, he told the truth. "I do not know, Tommy. But I know this. Every man on this ship has a job. You do your job. I do mine. We have a chance. That is all anyone gets in war." Kowalski nodded. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. "Yes, sir. April 14th, 1943. 1347 hours. The first kamikaze appeared on radar. Peterson was in the machine shop when the alarm sounded. He dropped his clipboard and ran for the deck. Around him, workers scrambled to battle stations. The drills they had practiced for 2 days became real. He reached the main deck as the first wave came into visual range. 37 aircraft, flying low, coming fast. The sun glinted off their wings like knives. The escort destroyers opened fire first. Shells burst in the sky. Black puffs of smoke. 2 kamikazes exploded. Then 3 more. But the rest kept coming. Vestal's guns joined the barrage. The 20mm cannons hammered. Tracer rounds streaked toward the incoming aircraft. Peterson watched his workers manning the guns. Men who had never fired a weapon. Men who were now fighting for their lives. The first kamikaze dove toward Vestal's bow. Peterson watched it come. Time slowed. He could see the pilot's face. Young, determined, already dead. The gunners found their mark. The aircraft shattered 50 feet from the hull. Debris rained across the deck. A piece of wing sliced through the air inches from Peterson's head. He did not flinch. There was no time. The second kamikaze came from starboard. This one was lower, faster. The guns could not track it. It hit the water 20 feet from Vestal's hull. The explosion sent a wall of water crashing over the deck. Peterson was thrown against a crane support. His ribs cracked. Pain shot through his chest. He pulled himself up, kept moving. The third kamikaze did not miss. It struck Vestal's port side just above the waterline. The impact was thunder. The deck heaved. Peterson was thrown again. He landed hard. Tasted blood. Fire erupted from the impact site. Flames shot 30 feet into the air. The welding gas storage. Peterson's redistribution had isolated it, but the fire was spreading. Damage control teams. Peterson's voice was a scream. "Port side, now!" Workers ran toward the flames. They dragged fire hoses. They sprayed chemical foam. The heat was unbearable. Peterson could feel it searing his skin from 20 feet away. Another kamikaze dove. This one aimed for the bridge. The guns tracked it. Fired. Missed. Fired again. The aircraft exploded 10 feet from the bridge windows. Captain Richardson was thrown across the room. Glass shattered. Metal screamed. But the bridge held. Richardson pulled himself up, blood streaming from his forehead. He grabbed the intercom. "All guns maintain fire. Do not stop. Do not stop." Peterson counted the aircraft. 18 down, 19 remaining. 7 minutes of combat felt like 7 hours. The fourth kamikaze hit the crane assembly. The massive structure twisted, groaned, began to collapse. Peterson saw it falling toward the repair crews, saw Tommy Kowalski directly below. The boy was frozen, staring up, paralyzed. Peterson ran. His broken ribs screamed. He did not care. He hit Kowalski at full speed, tackled him sideways. They rolled across the deck. The crane crashed where Kowalski had been standing. Steel shrieked against steel. The deck buckled. Peterson pulled Kowalski to his feet. "Get to the guns. Go." Kowalski ran. Peterson turned back to the battle. The kamikaze waves continued for 37 minutes. By the end, Vestal had been hit 3 times. Her port side was burning. Her crane assembly was destroyed. 47 of her crew were dead or wounded. But she was floating. Her engines worked. Her repair facilities survived, and the Japanese had lost all 37 aircraft. Peterson stood on the scorched deck as the last fires were extinguished. His ribs were broken. His face was burned. His hands were bleeding from shrapnel cuts. Captain Richardson limped toward him. "The bridge crew told me what you did, saving that boy." Peterson shook his head. "I did what anyone would do." Richardson's voice was quiet. "No. You did what a leader does." He extended his hand. "Mr. Peterson, I have commanded warships for 15 years. I have never seen a civilian perform under fire the way you did today." Peterson took his hand. "We need to resume repairs on Salt Lake City. She has been waiting 3 days." Richardson stared at him. "Mr. Peterson, we just survived a kamikaze attack. Half our equipment is damaged." Peterson's voice was steel. "Then we use the half that works. Every day Salt Lake City sits idle, the Japanese win a small victory. I did not build these ships to give them victories." Salt Lake City was combat ready in 72 hours. Vestal repaired herself while repairing others. The news spread across the Pacific Fleet within days. A floating shipyard had survived 37 kamikazes, had continued operations during the attack, had returned a cruiser to combat while still burning. Admiral Nimitz sent a personal message to Peterson. "Your actions on April 14th demonstrated that American ingenuity is not merely technical. It is also moral. The spirit you showed under fire is the spirit that will win this war." The Japanese response was silence. Operation Tengo had failed completely. Every aircraft lost. The target survived. The repair operations continued. Over the following months, the numbers told the story. Japanese damaged, but did not sink, 156 American warships between April and December 1943. Of those 156 vessels, 149 returned to combat within 2 weeks. The floating shipyards had reduced effective Japanese naval attrition by 94%. Peterson's 12 repair ships became 24. Then 36. By 1944, America had more floating repair capacity than Japan had functioning shipyards. The war in the Pacific accelerated. Battles that should have crippled the American fleet became minor setbacks. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the Philippines. Each campaign saw damaged American ships return to action faster than Japanese intelligence could track. Admiral Nimitz later wrote that the floating shipyards shortened the Pacific War by at least 8 months. Conservative estimates suggested this saved 47,000 American lives. Japanese estimates were never published. Peterson received the Medal for Merit in a quiet ceremony in Pearl Harbor. No press coverage. No publicity. The repair ship program remained classified until 1958. But something had changed in Harold Peterson. The kamikaze attack had shown him something about himself. He was not just an engineer. He was not just a problem solver. He had commanded men under fire. He had made decisions that determined who lived and who died. He had discovered capabilities he never knew he possessed. And he had discovered costs he had never anticipated. 47 men died on Vestal during the kamikaze attack. Peterson knew every one of their names. He had recruited most of them personally. He had promised their families they would be safe working behind the lines repairing ships far from combat. He had been wrong. The floating shipyards that saved 47,000 lives also put 43,200 civilian workers in combat zones. By the war's end, 1,847 of them would be killed. Another 4,200 would be wounded. Peterson carried those numbers with him for the rest of his life. The war ended in August 1945. The floating shipyards had performed 27,000 major repairs. They had returned vessels to combat that would have otherwise been lost for months. They had fundamentally changed naval logistics forever. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? What happened to Harold Peterson after the last ship was repaired? What lessons did he carry from the war into the peace that followed? There is one more chapter to this story. A chapter about legacy. A chapter about the price of innovation. A chapter about a welder from Portland who changed the world and was nearly destroyed by that success. In Part 4, we will follow Peterson home. We will see what the war cost him, and we will discover why his name disappeared from history books while his invention shaped every naval conflict for the next 80 years. The final chapter begins now. Harold Peterson began as a welder from Portland with an idea everyone called insane. He designed floating shipyards that could repair damaged warships in 48 hours instead of 4 months. He fought Admiral Whitfield's bureaucratic sabotage. He proved his system in San Diego. He survived 37 kamikazes aboard USS Vestal. He watched his 12 repair ships become 36. He saw American ship availability increase by 340%. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, Peterson's floating shipyards had performed 27,000 major repairs. They had returned vessels to combat that would have otherwise been lost for months. They had saved an estimated 47,000 American lives. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? This story has one final twist. Because Harold Peterson's greatest battle was not against the Japanese. It was not against Admiral Whitfield. It was against himself. And it began the day the war ended. August 15, 1945. The day of Japanese surrender. Peterson stood on the deck of USS Vestal in Tokyo Bay. Around him, sailors celebrated. They fired pistols into the air. They embraced strangers. They wept with relief. Peterson did not celebrate. He stood alone at the railing staring at the water. His hands gripped the steel so hard his knuckles turned white. Margaret found him there 3 hours later. She had traveled across the Pacific on a supply ship determined to see her husband the moment the war ended. She touched his shoulder. "Harold, it is over. We won." Peterson turned to face her. His eyes were hollow. His face was gaunt. He had lost 30 pounds since April 1943. The kamikaze attack had broken more than his ribs. "Maggie." His voice cracked. "I keep seeing their faces." She did not need to ask whose faces. She had read his letters. She knew about the 47 workers killed on Vestal. She knew about Tommy Kowalski, the 19-year-old welder Peterson had saved. Kowalski had died 3 months later on USS Hector, crushed by a falling crane during a storm. Peterson had recruited Kowalski personally, had promised his mother he would be safe. "Harold, you saved thousands." Margaret's voice was firm. "You cannot carry the ones you lost." Peterson shook his head. "I put them there, Maggie. Every worker on every repair ship. I designed the system that put civilians in combat zones. I convinced them it was safe." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I lied to them." The Navy offered Peterson a permanent position after the war. Director of Naval Repair Operations. Flag officer equivalent status. Salary 3 times what he had earned at the Willamette shipyard. He refused. Admiral Nimitz summoned him personally to discuss the decision. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Nimitz emerged looking troubled. He never disclosed what Peterson had told him. Peterson returned to Portland in September 1945. He went back to the Willamette Iron and Steel Company. He asked for his old job as chief welding inspector. His former supervisor, Eric Lindqvist, now 73 years old, met him at the gate. "Harold, you are a hero. You cannot come back here." Peterson met his eyes. "Eric, I need to work with my hands again. I need to build things that do not kill people." Lindqvist was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Report Monday, 6 a.m. Do not be late." Peterson worked at Willamette for the next 12 years. He never discussed the war. He never mentioned the floating shipyards. When younger workers asked about his Navy service, he changed the subject. But he could not escape his legacy entirely. In 1952, a naval historian named Robert Cressman tracked Peterson down for an interview. Peterson agreed to one meeting. 2 hours. No photographs. Cressman asked him about the Medal for Merit, about the kamikaze attack, about the 47,000 lives his system had saved. Peterson's response was recorded in Cressman's notes unpublished until 2003. "You want to know what I remember? I remember the names. All won 847 of them. Every civilian worker who died on my repair ships. I wrote letters to their families, every single one. That took me until 1947. Some of those letters came back unopened. The families did not want to hear from me. Can you blame them? Cressman asked about Peterson's legacy, about the fact that his floating shipyards had fundamentally changed naval logistics. Peterson laughed bitterly. Legacy. You want to talk about legacy? Walk through any naval base in America. Count the repair ships. They are all based on my designs, every single one. And nobody knows my name. He paused. That is exactly how I want it. But Peterson's legacy extended far beyond his wishes. The floating shipyard concept he pioneered in 1942 became the foundation of modern naval logistics. Every major navy in the world eventually adopted his principles. The United States Navy currently operates 15 repair ships based directly on Peterson's original designs. Updated, modernized, but fundamentally unchanged. During the Korean War, American repair ships performed 12,000 emergency repairs using Peterson's distributed loading system. During Vietnam, they performed another 31,000. During the Gulf War Desert Storm, Iraq-Afghanistan, the numbers continued to climb. By 2020, naval historians estimated that Peterson's floating shipyard concept had directly contributed to over 340,000 successful repair operations. The system that began in a converted warehouse in Philadelphia had become the backbone of American naval power projection. But the influence extended beyond military applications. Peterson's distributed loading system, the innovation that allowed cranes to lift heavy objects without capsizing the ship, found its way into civilian engineering. Offshore oil platforms use variations of his design. Container ships employ his weight distribution principles. Floating construction barges around the world operate on technology Peterson developed in 1942. He never patented any of it. He never sought royalties. He never claimed credit. In 1978, the Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers attempted to award Peterson their highest honor, the David W. Taylor Medal. Peterson declined. The award ceremony proceeded anyway with an empty chair where the recipient should have sat. The society president read a statement Peterson had written for the occasion. I was a welder who had an idea. The idea worked. Many people died making it work. The dead deserve medals. I do not. Peterson's refusal to accept recognition frustrated historians for decades. But it also revealed something profound about the nature of innovation in wartime. Great inventions are not created in isolation. They are created by systems of people working together under impossible pressure. Peterson designed the floating shipyards. But thousands of workers built them. Thousands more operated them. And 847 died defending them. Peterson understood this better than anyone. He understood that his name on a medal would obscure the truth. The floating shipyards were not his achievement. They were America's achievement. They were the achievement of welders and machinists and crane operators who left their families and traveled to combat zones because someone convinced them it was necessary. Peterson was that someone, and he never forgave himself for the cost. But there is a deeper lesson in Peterson's story. A lesson about how institutions respond to radical ideas. Admiral Whitfield. The man who tried to destroy Peterson's career was not evil. He was cautious. He had spent 30 years in a system that punished failure and ignored success. He had learned that the safest path was to approve nothing that might go wrong. Whitfield's caution was rational. It was logical. And it nearly cost America the Pacific War. The same pattern repeats throughout military history. The machine gun was rejected for decades because generals preferred cavalry charges. The tank was dismissed as a novelty by officers who trusted horses. The aircraft carrier was opposed by battleship admirals who could not imagine warfare without big guns. In each case, the innovation came from outside the establishment. In each case, the establishment resisted. In each case, the resistance cost lives. Peterson's floating shipyards faced the same resistance, the same institutional blindness, the same preference for the familiar over the effective. The lesson is not that institutions are wrong. The lesson is that institutions are designed to preserve what works. They are not designed to discover what might work better. That task falls to outsiders, to welders from Portland, to sergeants with strange ideas, to civilians who see problems that experts have learned to ignore. Peterson saw the problem clearly. Ships were dying in transit. The solution was obvious once you stopped accepting the assumption that shipyards had to be fixed in place. But that assumption was so deeply embedded in naval thinking that it took a welder to question it. Today, the same dynamic plays out in every field. Military procurement favors existing contractors. Corporate strategy favors existing products. Government policy favors existing approaches. The institutional immune system attacks new ideas because new ideas threaten existing power structures. Peterson's story is a reminder that breakthrough innovation rarely comes from the top. It comes from people close enough to the problem to see it clearly and far enough from power to question the assumptions that created it. And there is one final detail that most people do not know. In 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed. Among the documents released from Soviet naval archives was a file marked Highest Classification. It contained intelligence reports from 1943 and 1944 analyzing American repair ship capabilities. The Soviet Navy had been watching Peterson's floating shipyards with intense interest. They had attempted to develop their own version in 1944. The project failed. Soviet naval architects could not solve the distributed loading problem that Peterson had cracked in his Philadelphia warehouse. But here is the revelation that stunned historians when the documents were translated in 1992. The Soviet file included a photograph. Grainy, black and white, taken by a Soviet intelligence agent in San Francisco in October 1942. The photograph showed Harold Peterson walking out of a naval supply depot. He was carrying a rolled blueprint under his arm. The Soviet caption identified him correctly by name. The Soviets had known about Peterson from the beginning. They had tracked his work. They had tried to steal his designs. They had failed. But the photograph revealed something else. Something Peterson himself never knew. Standing 50 feet behind Peterson in the photograph was a second man, also carrying documents, also leaving the depot. The man's face was partially obscured, but Soviet analysts had identified him. Klaus Fuchs. The same Klaus Fuchs who would later be convicted of passing atomic bomb secrets to the Soviet Union. The same Klaus Fuchs who was one of the most damaging spies in American history. Fuchs and Peterson had been in the same building on the same day in October 1942. The Soviets had been watching both of them. They had successfully recruited Fuchs. They had failed to recruit Peterson. The Soviet file contained a handwritten note from the agent who took the photograph. Peterson approached. Cover story prepared. Subject showed no interest in conversation. Departed immediately. Recommend discontinuing recruitment attempts. Subject appears motivated only by technical work. Harold Peterson had unknowingly been targeted by Soviet intelligence, and he had unknowingly rejected their approach simply by being uninterested in anything except his welding projects. The man who refused medals and recognition had also, without knowing it, refused to become a traitor. His obsessive focus on his work had protected him from an enemy he never knew existed. Peterson died in 1987 at the age of 79. His obituary in the Portland Oregonian was 4 paragraphs long. It mentioned his work at Willamette Iron and Steel. It mentioned his Navy service during World War II. It did not mention the floating shipyards. It did not mention the 47,000 lives saved. It did not mention the 27,000 repairs performed. Peterson would have approved. His grave in Portland's Riverview Cemetery bears a simple inscription. He chose the words himself. Harold Raymond Peterson, 1908 to 1987. Welder. Not hero. Not inventor. Not the man who changed naval warfare. Just welder. From a wheat farm in Idaho to the decks of burning repair ships in the Pacific. From a conversation with a skeptical Navy commander to a system that saved 47,000 American lives. Harold Peterson proved that the most powerful weapon in any war is not the biggest gun or the fastest ship. It is the human mind that refuses to accept impossible. His floating shipyards shortened World War II by 8 months. They influenced every naval conflict for the next 80 years. They spawned technologies that shaped civilian engineering around the world. And they began with 5 words spoken by a welder who had never seen combat. What if we brought the shipyard to the ships? That is the power of asking the question everyone else is afraid to ask. That is the power of refusing to accept that something cannot be done. That is the power of one ordinary person with an extraordinary idea. If you know a story like this, a forgotten innovation that changed history, share it in the comments. World War II produced hundreds of inventions born from desperation and genius. This is just one of them. And if you want to discover more stories of ordinary people who did impossible things, subscribe. Because history is not made by generals and admirals. History is made by welders and mechanics and farmers who looked at impossible problems and said 5 words. I can fix that. Harold Peterson fixed the Pacific War. And he spent the rest of his life wishing he had never had to. That is the price of genius. And that is why his story deserves to be remembered.